Oh, it's our pleasure. My
Oh,
pleasure.
mine too. I always enjoy your movies. Always enjoy your music. I actually spoke to you for Cyrano. What feels like a million years ago, but was probably only a year ago. Time is
Yeah,
also fleeting. But it's really interesting. This film especially ties in music so completely to the actual like act of watching the film and taking it in and I'm curious, at what point does that conversation begin? Because Rebecca, you know you're have a lot to worry about, let's say, when you're making a movie, but the music is such an underrated part of this. So when does that conversation begin? Is it early on? You're talking to the production design, you're talking to all these departments. Are you also thinking about the music, or does that kind of come into play a little later when you've sort of seen a little bit of it come out and you know maybe the flavor of the film you're making? Because I'm sure it changes in production as compared to, on the page in your mind.
Definitely changes. I mean, this was a unique situation, which I want Bryce to talk about a little bit. Normally you might have some idea going in, but like you said, you allow yourself to be surprised in production. And as you begin to edit, you bring often a composer in early, but I mean, I have, but never as early as what we had. Bryce, do you want to talk a little bit about the process?
yeah. I mean, you probably know that music is often one of the last things that happens on a film, and it can be really frustrating because you're brought into like almost a fully, cooked meal,
Yeah.
and then you're like, what do you have to offer? Like a bit of
Yeah.
sauce, or where in this case, Rebecca really brought me in early, as she had written the script and was in, preparing for production, but really there were these two giant scenes, which music was a focus, the two opera scenes. And then the fact that it's about a composer, this idea that all the music could really come from Stephen, who's the character played by Peter Dinklage. So and then the way the opera scenes are written into the narrative, they weave in and out of, there's kind of um hints of this music developing prior to seeing so it's really really almost kind of a new form. I wouldn't call it like writing a film score. It's actually more similar to writing an opera, to be honest, where you're like collaborating with a librettist, where because Rebecca was the librettist of the two operas where she wrote these scenes, and I basically set what she wrote. I mean, I didn't she wrote these two operas and then said, will this even work? And I found a way to do it, and she trusted me, which is like a wonderful process, and we just kind of immediately hit the ground running. There was some back and forth and careful readjustment of the score based on things like how are we going to shoot this. I mean, it was there's some really interesting anecdotes about like she had put in the idea of four organs for the second opera, which I'm not sure why you had that idea, but it's brilliant. A, it's really original. B, it kind of there's a piece by Steve Reich called Four Organs, which is one of my favorite pieces, so it kind of called to mind some a sort of hint of
Yeah.
that, which gave a little bit of a direction. And it gave a really interesting sort of direction for instrumentation. So yeah, it was the first time I've had that type of collaboration where to be so early in the process.
And the four organs, well, part of it was just that there's an organ on the boat. So I thought, well, in the spirit of him taking things from life and bringing them to opera. And then I thought, four organs is so cool. I mean, the sound would be so cool. And just visually, I was also thinking about shooting it, and how, in some ways, I mean, I know I listen to music and I love to go to opera, but I'm also pretty naive. So in a way, I think my naivete worked in my advantage in a way. It was just like, what would be cool, and that's how that happened. But yeah, the one of the things that was really remarkable, think, is that I had written these lines, which I didn't know if they would scan for the libretto and for the words in the operas. And Bryce found a way of, like, I thought they were so simplistic and sort of ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And he turned them, just totally changed the rhythm within the lines. I mean, that was just amazing to me how that worked.
It is incredible, especially if you're like me. I can't play music. I bought two guitars. They sit on my wall. Like I broke a string immediately. Went, never mind, not for me. So, I imagine it's sort of the way anyone who's very good at something, people who aren't kind of look at it, like, well, how do you make that out of thin air? If you're good at music, you can see the story. You can sort of see the notes, and when you, especially coming on early, you can form it in a way. And you're right, it rarely happens. And I think when you do hear about it happening, it always does end up being this very special score, and usually very linked to the movie in a way that I think, all scores, are tied to their movie in some way. But I think when someone comes on early, you often end up always thinking of the film when you think of the score, because the music just fits. It's like the key in the lock. And I'm sure the extra time is helpful, but also just knowing how it'll work with story beats, I think is a treat, as opposed to, like you said, you're kind of the last thing. You're given this finished movie and be like, okay, we got a couple weeks, out of nowhere, please create something that'll fit seamlessly into this. So being there from the start, I think not only do you feel like more of the process, part of the process, you get to be a part of the process truly. And this movie especially, you see it on the screen, and it's very special. It's not really a question there, more a compliment.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah.
Well, there's also that part, that is not the operas, that's the score itself. And that, I feel, Bryce came in very early with that as well, and had ideas, sent ideas for sounds which then it was a back and forth, so that we were cutting to his music there as well. And there had been an early thought that Katia Lebec, who's our mutual great friend, could be the pianist to play a lot of the, so and she ended up playing so brilliantly on it. And I feel that a lot of the emotion in the film is contained in that part of the score as well.
Yeah, the emotion in the film really does tie in through the music, which is, I think you never know if it's going to work or not, because music is so personal. One person's every song is someone's favorite song. And I'm sure this from, someone tells you, oh, I love this. And you're like, I wasn't expecting to hear that, but that's cool. So when it works like that, I think watching this movie, you do get really caught up in the opera, in the regular score. I'm a big Springsteen fan, so and ending on that song, and the way that is narratively even fitting for the film, in a way, I feel like you never know if you've got it until someone else watches it, just because it's hitting such a different emotional note even than the film, which is the same thing in that you never know if someone's gonna, what if someone had a bad day and they go and they watch your movie, like, I don't care about love, you having the music too and having it fit, I think it just kind of makes you swoon in a way that I think very few films do anymore, while being like deeply weird in a fun way. Like there isn't another movie like this, which I kind of can't get over.
I love that.
I like that description. That's a compliment. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Springsteen song is a really powerful, I mean, for both of us, just such a wonderful experience to work with him, and he really fell in love with the film. And obviously, Addicted to Romance, the chorus of that song is the same lyric that's sung in the first opera. It's also what afflicts the main, the character played by Marissa Tomei. So it really kind of brings and then the song itself, just as this kind of pure love song, really kind of brings the movie to such a beautiful close. And I think for this musical journey between these two very colorful operas, and then this kind of skeletal score, which is piano and very rhythmic, and kind of, it's like the river running under the film in terms of pace, but it's actually resists too much sentimentality, I think. And so then to kind of like let it all, then it's like the minute we hear Springsteen, it's kind of like you're hearing the bard, or you're hearing, it has this kind of like almost mythological, like, I sort of like when we were talking about it, like, well, what voice should we hear? And it's like, his voice is so singular. So it was really like what was already a great experience for me became like a, like once in a lifetime, or, several lifetimes experience, just to get to do this with Rebecca and then work with Bruce was such a trip.
I can imagine. And it's even, I think even just the working together part for both of you, and Rebecca sort of especially, when you're doing this and you hear the it's in progress, and you start to hear what the sound's like, how do you voice cracked, as a filmmaker but not necessarily a musician, guide that? Because I've heard, I remember listening to Denis Villeneuve tell me a story about working with his composers and like getting these things sent to him, and they're amazing, but they're not necessarily what's going to fit for the film, and having to develop a way of talking to someone especially if you haven't worked with them before, of being able to go, amazing, but we have to go in this direction. I may not know what I'm talking about in the same way you do, but I just need to point you this way, because I know once you're looking here instead of here, it's going to be the thing that was in my head. And how do you do that in a way that's not dismissive? I think it's just so early to do that. It's so easy to have that be the case, as opposed to feel like a partner.
I think, for my part, it's true, not being a musician, but as a director, one of the main things a director needs to have is a sense of tone, story tone. And that's something that I have innately and understand, and was able to, and Bryce was able to understand what I was talking about. I think that's the main thing, is that I may not understand what's not working in a certain moment, but I know somehow how to talk to him in a way that he was able to receive it. I mean, you could have the wrong person and they just won't understand what you're talking about. So you kind of know, you have a formless hunch about what, and it's usually to do with what you need the scene to be. But with us, there were very few moments like that. There was maybe one track that had to get refined to the point of tonally being right. I have to say this, I heard the two operas, when I heard them early on, and this was just with kind of samples, I was just blown away. I mean, they were just, the first one was exactly right in all the, its power and even the humor it needed to convey, but at the same time, it's real power, which was actually only a tiny fraction of when I heard it with instruments, which was a whole other experience, I have to say. And then the second one, which is always needed to be a more emotional thing. And I just got chills, so what a great experience.
Plus, it's that sort of surreal nature of like, that music only exists because of me. Like, I didn't make it, but I had an idea in my head. And eventually we're at this point where someone is sitting there creating music to help tell my story. And I think like the excitement that I kind of hear from you of like, and I heard this and I was so moved. It's also that moment like, it only exists because I had this idea. Like, that's
right. And it was a moment where I thought, oh, a space opera. I haven't seen a space opera.
Yeah, exactly.
let's, when that is, it's very linked to play as when you're a child, that sort of deep sense of satisfaction. But I mean, really, it's that collaboration and mind melding, which is rare that we had.
Oh yeah, and Bryce, when you're, this is your medium in a way. You're, it's not the same. I give me a million years, I couldn't do it. But creating music is a thing you know how to do. But what's the first sort of step? Everything's blank. Like with writing, there's nothing on the page. There's instruments next to you if you want, but there's a blank page. Like, what's the very sort of first thing you do? Because it could be, anything almost. For an idiot like me, I have no idea.
I mean, a project like this is so wonderful because there's so much in the script. Like you said, it comes from Rebecca. Like we co-wrote these pieces, really. Where we did. It's like she actually often, like when we write songs in my band, it starts with the music and this lyric, and in this case, the lyrics came first, and so I felt like that first opera scene is very conversational. It's the exchange between the two main characters who are who are both in the film and in the opera, and the tone is edgier, has like, it's the main character confronting his block, and he's finally like inspired and liberated, and has this sort of, he's also like really deep in his own kind of self-involved, heady composer space, which is something I really relate to. So it has, immediately called to mind a certain actually music that resembles what I would naturally write, to be honest. Like that music in terms of my orchestral music is the closest I've ever, like in terms of what would ever be in a film. It's quite ambitious and dissonant and active, and it's concert music. The second opera plays more like a song, and is very lyrical. So I felt like it needed to have a sense of resolution and beauty, and there's a bit of edge to it at a certain point where the villain comes in, and but it basically And I also knew it was the end of the film. So, you know, which is a fair amount of pressure. It really needed to be something special. It was like, yeah. And I think I kind of like lightning, just like this whole project for us. I think lightning sort of struck a couple times, and then a third time when Bruce came in or whatever, you know, it's like, it just, you know, I could have missed it. That said, Rebecca's like, the other thing I should say is often when you're a composer in a film, you're treated, you know, like it's kind of, there's this relationship. I think architects probably go through this where it's like, no, but the windows, could it be like, not, could it be circular instead of rectangular? You know, there's always this kind of, where I think Rebecca, I think because she's worked in so many, you know, she writes short stories, and she's written, like, she's worked in so many different medium and with so many different artists, that like with me, she treated me like we were, you know, two artists. I wasn't necessarily trying to fit into, you know, be pigeonholed into one thing. And so it was a very, very liberating, empowering. I had a lot of agency to kind of try things, to sort of dream, and she would always listen. And then she's also very firm, where if it, like, there was one piece of music that is actually one of my favorite pieces of music that I wrote for this, that we didn't use, that, and she really tried, and she just kept saying, you know, it just doesn't, you know, that it doesn't speak to the picture. And that was like, at that point I was ready to hear it, you know, of course, because it was like, well, of course, you know, it's like, we've done, you've been so open to my ideas, and then, you know, but she's also very clear when it doesn't work, and that just allows for a better collaboration.
Yeah, and I think you see it in the final product. Like I was saying, it is old fashioned in that way, in that there is a score that feels like it's threaded into the film, and you have the thesis statement song by a big musician. I think, like, it feels very old fashioned, but maybe just because we don't get it anymore, and when we've never had it in this way. So I think as we wrap up, it's just, I think that's something to be incredibly proud of, is just finding a new way to do something very much in the like core of cinematic language. Like, here's a thing we almost take for granted. Now you have it in this way that's not necessarily calling attention to it, but is completely unique. And honestly, what you think about when the film ends, and that's special. So you guys should just be very, very proud and feel good about this.
Thank you so much. I love the way you say that. That's great.
Oh, well, listen, I try. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the film. I really love the music. I'm a fan. So this was great. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you so much, Joey.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.